The Medical Missionary Manual, Section 6, Health Principles. Chapter 19, Should we ever compromise our health principles in order to help those around us? The blueprint for reaching the people while still personally obeying the law of God. When we are with other people, either Adventist or non-Adventist, who do not understand or agree with our health principles, when should we stand by our personal religious and health principles? Is it right to temporarily compromise with them in order to reach the people where they are? How far should we go to conciliate those around us? 1. We must meet the people where they are and begin our ministry to reach their needs on their level of understanding. To reach the people wherever they are and whatever their position or condition, and to help them in every way possible, this is true ministry. By such effort you may win hearts and open a door of access to perishing souls. Ministry of Healing, page 156. In teaching, he came down to their level. He, the majesty of heaven, answered their questions and simplified his important lessons to meet their childish understanding. Ministry of Healing, page 42. This is in reference to his work for children. There is need of coming close to the people by personal effort. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, the inexperienced counseled. We are to weep with those that weep, and rejoice with those that rejoice, accompanied by the power of persuasion, the power of prayer, the power of the love of God. This work will not, cannot, be without fruit. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 458. To accept people where they are and help any way possible is true ministry. Welfare Ministry, page 121. A case where chicken broth was served under Sister White's direction because the people were poor and nothing else was available. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 462. Do not make rash movements and urge views upon people, but let health reform be presented carefully by education backed up by example. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 462. Do not to advocate advanced steps in health reform without teaching people how to prepare healthful food. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 460. An approach to those whose diet is lacking in proper elements of nutrition. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 474. We must treat new converts tenderly who are pressed with poverty and who have lived largely on a meat diet. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 463. The ministry of Christ was in marked contrast to that of the Jewish elders. Their regard for tradition and formalism had destroyed all real freedom of thought or action. They lived in continual dread of defilement. To avoid contact with the unclean, they kept aloof, not only from the Gentiles, but from the majority of their own people, seeking neither to benefit them nor to win their friendship. By dwelling constantly on these matters, they had dwarfed their minds and narrowed the orbit of their lives. Their example encouraged egotism and intolerance among all classes of the people. Jesus began the work of reformation by coming into close sympathy with humanity. While he showed the greatest reverence for the law of God, he rebuked the pretentious piety of the Pharisees and tried to free the people from the senseless rules that bound them. He was seeking to break down the barriers which separated the different classes of society, that he might bring men together as children of one family. The Desire of Ages, page 150. Jesus was social in nature and visited the homes of all classes of society. Desire of Ages, pages 150 to 151. We must meet the people where they are and link our interests with humanity. Desire of Ages, page 152. Jesus studied how to reach the rich also by taking an interest in them. Ministry of Healing, pages 24 to 25. Jesus gained the interest and confidence of the publicans as he ate with them. Desire of Ages, page 26. Christ carefully used the talents of speech as he associated with all classes of society and always had a word in due season for every occasion. Welfare Ministry, pages 286 to 288. Carefulness in presenting health reform in its most extreme form is needed where circumstances forbid its adoption. Counsels on Diet and Food, page 463. We also need to be careful not to make sweeping statements, but consider circumstances. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 462 to 463. Do not make isolated ideas attest and criticize others, but practice temperance yourself. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 464. We must go no faster than we can take those with us whose consciences and intellects are convinced of the truth we advocate. We must meet the people where they are. Some of us have been many years in arriving at our present position in health reform. It is slow work to obtain a reform in diet. We have powerful appetites to meet, for the world is given to gluttony. If we should allow the people as much time as we have required to come up to the present advanced state in reform, we would be very patient with them, and allow them to advance step by step, as we have done, until their feet are firmly established upon the health reform platform. But we should be very cautious not to advance too fast, lest we be obliged to retrace our steps. In reforms, we would better come one step short of the mark than to go one step beyond it. And if there is error at all, let it be on the side next to the people. Above all things, we should not with our pens advocate positions that we do not put to a practical test in our own families, upon our own tables. We bear positive testimony against tobacco, spirituous liquors, snuff, tea, coffee, flesh meats, butter, spices, rich cakes, mince pies, a large amount of salt, and all exciting substances used as articles of food. If we come to persons who have not been enlightened in regard to health reform and present our strongest positions at first, there is danger of their becoming discouraged as they see how much they have to give up, so that they will make no effort to reform. We must lead the people along patiently and gradually, remembering the whole of the pit whence they were digged. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 468 to 469. 2. Then gradually, we should lead the people to higher standards and more complete obedience to the laws of God. There is great need of instruction in regard to dietetic reform. Wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food are in no small degree responsible for the intemperance and crime and wretchedness that curse the world. Ministry of Healing, page 146. In teaching health principles, keep before the mind the great object of reform, that its purpose is to secure the highest development of body and mind and soul. Show that the laws of nature, being the laws of God, are designed for our good, that obedience to them promotes happiness in this life and aids in preparation for the life to come. Lead the people to study the manifestation of God's love and wisdom in the works of nature. Lead them to study that marvelous organism, the human system, and the laws by which it is governed. Those who perceive the evidences of God's love, who understand something of the wisdom and beneficence of His laws, and the results of obedience, will come to regard their duties and obligations from an altogether different point of view. Instead of looking upon an observance of the laws of health as a matter of sacrifice or self-denial, they will regard it, as it really is, an inestimable blessing. Every gospel worker should feel that the giving of instruction in the principles of healthful living is a part of his appointed work. Of this work there is great need, and the world is open for it. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 457 to 458. People are to be taught to lay aside unhealthful practices. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 447. People to be impressed with the importance of living up to their knowledge of health reform. Counsels on Health, page 441. Present principles of health reform carefully and thoroughly to all. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 449. Do not try to reform by attacking wrong habits of others, but present to them something better than they possess. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 459. Do not urge sudden changes in diet, but hold up the health reform principles and let the Lord lead the honest in heart. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 465. We must teach people patiently. Everything cannot be learned at once. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 465. 3. In meeting the people where they are, we must never personally transgress the laws of God. Romans 6 verse 1-2. Do not continue in a course of sin. James 4 verse 17. It is sin if we know to do good and don't do it. Romans 6 verses 6-23. The old man of sin is crucified with Christ. Yield to God. John 9 verse 41. When light comes, sin is then imputed if light isn't followed. John 12 verse 35. Walk while ye have the light, lest darkness come upon you. John 12 verse 42. Some are afraid to confess Christ because of what the religious leaders might do or say to them. Matthew 10 verses 32-33. If we continue in God's word, we are disciples. Truth makes us free. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 17. We should eat for strength and not for drunkenness. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31. Do all to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 6 verses 19-20. We should glorify God in our body because it is His temple. 1 Corinthians 3 verses 16-17. God will destroy those who defile the body temple. Romans 12 verse 1. Our bodies are to be presented as a living sacrifice. Deuteronomy 14 verses 2-3. God's chosen people are not to eat any abominable thing. Exodus 15 verse 26. If we are obedient to His commandments, God will keep us from diseases the world suffers. Ecclesiastes 12 verses 13-14. Fear God and keep commandments. This is the whole duty of man. Revelation 14 verse 12. The saints keep God's commandments and the faith of Jesus. Revelation 22 verse 14. Those that do His commandments enter the New Jerusalem. As we near the close of time, we must rise higher and still higher upon the question of health reform and Christian temperance, presenting it in a more positive and decided manner. We must strive continually to educate the people, not only by our words, but by our practice. Precept and practice combined have a telling influence. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6, page 112. We have no right to wantonly violate a single principle of the laws of God. Christians should not follow the customs and practices of the world. The history of Daniel is placed upon record for our benefit. He chose to take a course that would make him singular in the king's court. He did not conform to the habits of the courtiers in eating and drinking, but purposed in his heart that he would not eat of the king's meat nor drink of his wines. This was not a hastily formed, wavering purpose, but one that was intelligently formed and resolutely carried out. Those who serve God in sincerity and truth will be a peculiar people, unlike the world, separate from the world. Their food will be prepared, not to encourage gluttony or gratify a perverted taste, but to secure to themselves the greatest physical strength and consequently the best mental conditions. Our faith requires us to elevate the standard of reform and take advanced steps. The condition of our acceptance with God is a practical separation from the world. The Lord calls upon us as a people, come out from among them, and be ye separate, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. The world may despise you because you do not meet their standard, engage in their dissipating amusements, and follow their pernicious ways. But the God of heaven promises to receive you, and to be a father unto you. Ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. 2 Corinthians 6, verses 17-18. Counsels on Health, pages 50-51. The mind must be trained through daily tests to habits of fidelity, to a sense of the claims of right and duty above inclination and pleasure. Minds thus trained do not waver between right and wrong, as the reed trembles in the wind. But as soon as matters come before them, they discern at once that principle is involved, and they instinctively choose the right without long debating the matter. They are loyal because they have trained themselves the habit of faithfulness and truth. Third Testimonies, page 22. In your association with unbelievers, do not allow yourselves to be swerved from right principles. If you sit at their table, eat temperately and only of food that will not confuse the mind. Keep clear of intemperance. You cannot afford to weaken your mental or physical powers, lest you become unable to discern spiritual things. Keep your mind in such a condition that God can impress it with the precious truths of His Word. Do not watch others in order to point out their faults or errors. Teach by example. Let your self-denial and your victory over appetite be an illustration of obedience to right principles. Let your life bear witness to the sanctifying, ennobling influence of truth. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 464 to 465. To all hygienic reformers, I would say, live up strictly to the convictions of your own enlightened mind. Be not led into indulgence by the entreaties of friends. Live the reform at home, and when you go abroad, carry it with you. Live it, and at proper times, in proper places, and in a proper manner, talk its principles. Ever hold on your way, and by all proper means labor to impress those around you with the importance of the subject. Counsels on Health, page 447. In reaching this decision, the Hebrew youth did not act presumptuously, but in firm reliance upon God. They did not choose to be singular, but they would be so rather than dishonor God. Should they compromise with wrong in this instance by yielding to the pressure of circumstances, their departure from principle would weaken their sense of right and their abhorrence of wrong. The first wrong step would lead to others until, their connection with heaven severed, they would be swept away by temptation. Prophets and Kings, page 483. Read Prophets and Kings, pages 481 to 483, regarding Daniel and the three Hebrew words. True brotherhood can never be maintained by compromising principle. The opposition of the children of disobedience is excited by a Christianity that is spiritual. At this crisis is the time to decide who are God's faithful servants, who will be true to principles, who will bear in mind that truth is too dearly purchased for its least principle to be surrendered, that peace and harmony which are secured by mutual concessions to avoid all differences of opinions are not worthy of the name. On points of feeling between man and man, concessions should sometimes be made, but never should one iota of principle be sacrificed to obtain harmony. Review and Herald, January 16, 1900. Jesus himself never purchased peace by compromise. His heart overflowed with love for the whole human race, but he was never indulgent to their sins. No man can be true to principle without exciting opposition. A Christianity that is spiritual will be opposed by children of disobedience. The Desire of Ages, page 356. We are to give the world a pure representation of Christ. Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 459. Carefully present the light on health reform and set the right example. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 462. Sister White always made the table an object lesson of health reform. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 472 to 473. Customs and appetites bring disease bequeathed by our ancestors. Counsels on Health, page 49. The world is no criterion for us. Strict temperance in all things is required. Counsels on Health, page 51. Each man is to think and act for himself and look to God for wisdom. Counsels on Health, page 48. Any course which decreases our physical health is a sin against God. Counsels on Health, page 43. One must be sincere. Insincerity in the truth is fatal. Counsels on Health, pages 34 to 35. We have no time or strength to spend in indulging appetite. Counsels on Health, page 128. We will suffer the consequences if we dwarf or cripple any function of the body. Counsels on Health, page 107. Love of the world, appetite, and presumption are the three great temptations. Counsels on Health, pages 287 to 288. If religious principles govern, danger of committing great errors is small. Counsels on Health, page 288. Our influence is either leading others upward or downward. Counsels on Health, page 421. We little realize the influence we exert over others day by day. Counsels on Health, page 413. The canvasser, when staying in homes, can set a good example for health reform by not eating meat or other harmful things. Counsels on Health, page 463. Continual backsliding in health reform is a cause of low spirituality and has erected barriers. Counsels on Health, pages 578 to 579. If Seventh-day Adventists practiced health reform, it would indeed be a spectacle to the world, and we would show greater zeal for the salvation of lost souls. Counsels on Health, page 575. Those who don't overcome appetite will fail of perfecting Christian character. Counsels on Health, page 574. If ever there is a necessity of a simple diet, it is now. Counsels on Health, page 622. This world is a training school for the higher school in the hereafter. Counsels on Health, page 581. Our example in health reform is more powerful than our preaching it. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 141. 4. The responsibility of the minister in relationship to health reform. One important part of the work of the ministry is to faithfully present to the people the health reform, as it stands connected with the third angel's message, as a part and parcel of the same work. They should not fail to adopt it themselves, and should urge it upon all who profess to believe the truth. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 74. Our ministers should become intelligent upon this question. They should not ignore it, nor be turned aside by those who call them extremists. Let them find out what constitutes true health reform, and teach its principles, both by precept and by a quiet, consistent example. Temperance, page 499. Ministers should become intelligent on health reform and lead the people higher, and still higher, in the work of reform. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 452. Presidents of our conferences should take the right side on this question. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 452 to 453. Had ministers taken hold of this truth, there would have been a most decided reformation in eating, drinking, and dressing. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 453. No man is to be set apart as a leader or teacher of the people while his own life contradicts God's counsels on health reform. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 453 to 454. Those who stand aloof from teaching the people on this question are not following where the great physician leads the way. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 454. Ministers must be strictly temperate in eating and drinking, or they will take all the force from the message they bear. Counsels on Health, page 575. Men preaching this message should be examples to the people in eating, drinking, conversation, and deportment. Counsels on Health, pages 572 to 573. The more responsible the position, the greater the influence for right or wrong. Counsels on Health, page 614. Conclusion. In the matter of leading the people to the standard of Jesus, we should exercise caution and bring them to new truths slowly and only as they are prepared to receive them. If there must be error, let it always be on the side of the people. It is always better to stop one step short of the mark than to go one step beyond it. God's plan for teaching health reform to others who know it not seems to be 1. A consistent example ourselves, and 2. When inquiries are made as to our reason for the stand we take, we have an opportunity to bring the principles to the front. It is clear that as far as our personal adherence to the standard, nothing should ever allow us to deviate, neither time nor place, custom, friends, relatives, or enemies. Our own spiritual connection with heaven and our most powerful testimony, our example, will be determined by that adherence. The personal example of Ellen G. White. She took not one step backward. Instead, she broke away from meat, butter, and 3 meals when the light came. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 483. She did not advance any extreme view, but advocated a healthful, nourishing diet. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 484. If determined to overcome, the Lord will heal and strengthen. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 485. She ate enough to satisfy the wants of nature, but the appetite was keen when she left the table as when she came. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 485 to 486. She always served enough simple, healthful food for all who came. Counsels on Health, page 486. She did not hold herself criterion for others. Her table was set twice a day, but if some desired something to eat in the evening, they were not forbidden. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 491. She practiced a two-meal plan for 35 years, as she wrote in 1903. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 490. No butter, meat, cheese, or greasy mixtures of food were on her table. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 491. Reports that she hadn't lived up to the health reform principles were not true. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 491 to 492. She refused to place in her stomach any combinations producing fermentation. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 493. Light given to her was by the Lord. She never made a raid upon anyone in regard to the table or its contents. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 493. She tried to learn what was best for her and partook of it quietly. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 493 to 494. She carefully guarded against any habit which lessened the power of the intellect. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 492. 5. When entertaining visitors or visiting with others. We must not violate our standards when we are with others. Fashionable visiting is often an occasion of gluttony. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 88. Christians should not be such slaves to fashion and appetite. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 232. The purpose of visiting with others is to be a blessing, not to indulge appetite. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 88. Some have an inadequate diet for their own family, so that they can have an excess for visitors. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 180. There needs to be greater simplicity in entertaining. The needs of the family should have first attention. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 89. Elaborate feast for guests is a burden on the wife and an injury to the stomach. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 132. The negative effects of such elaborate entertaining on one's own children. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 202. Wholesome, nutritious, and simple food can be prepared for visitors. Counsels on Diet and Foods, pages 88 to 89. The only times that Sister White ate any unhealthful food with others was when everything on the table was unhealthful, and she had to eat a little something to sustain life. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 457. Cultivate self-control. Restrain appetite. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 176. Few have moral stamina to resist temptation. They imagine they are hungry when the desire of the mind has not been fortified with firm principle. Fourth Testimonies, page 574. We can do medical missionary work by eating and drinking to glory of God. Manuscript 93, 1901.